Hi lads, my name is Goblin and welcome to my Unholy Death Knight PvE raiding DPS guide updated for 6.2, the Helfire Citadel patch. There will be a number of sections to this guide which can be accessed using the navigation bar above. We will be covering gearing, talent, glyphs, damage and utility, though if you subscribe to my channel you'll see many more videos covering more precise topics. Let's jump into the guide. First of all, we'll begin with the essentials in order to ensure your Death Knight is tuned up properly to maximise his pressure in a PvE environment. The main stats an Unholy DK wants to prioritise when choosing gear pieces is firstly multi-strike and then mastery. All the rest are, kind of hit and miss, kind of useless. You also want to fully enchant multi-strike and use the rune of a Fallen Crusader on your weapon. Lastly, make sure that all your gem slot sockets are filled with multi-strike gems. The reason why multi-strike is so beneficial is due to the passive effect Necrosis, which essentially means that our multi-strikes do more damage than other classes. Now let's run through the talents. The first thing you need to understand about talents is that some are chosen due to the player's preference, some are better than others in different situations, and some are mandatory and some are completely useless. The first tier is between Plague Leech and Necrotic Plague depending on what playstyle you want to adapt to your DK, which we'll explain later in the damage section. The second tier is between Purgatory or Anti-Magic Zone, but Lich Ball may come in useful in soloing situations. Use Anti-Magic Zone when you can protect your raid team from massive AoE magical damage. If there isn't a situation like that, then just go for Purgatory, since this is essentially a self-resurrection when combined with Death Pact. The third tier is extremely situational. Most of the time, Death's Advance will be the most useful, especially since the movement speed stacks with Unholy Presence, and you're nearly as fast as a Feral Druid, pretty much. Go for Asphyxiate if the stun is useful in the fight, like for instance locking down a boss ad, and the same goes for Chillblains, which is useful for locking down big groups of ads. Now, people have been discussing which is the best talent in the fourth tier ever since the dawn of time, so I'm not going to go over it too much. I'm just going to explain why each is better than the other. So, Rune of Corruption, when used at the precisely correct time, will provide you with more runes overall in a longer fight. However, with Blood type you can turn your Unholy runes into Death runes, which means you can spam more Blood Boils, which will increase your AoE damage in certain fights. Empowerment, don't even think about it. Tier 5 is fairly simple. Go for Death Pact with Purgatory in most fights for minimum DPS loss, but if you are in some kind of situation where you must solo something without a healer, then go for Death Siphon and Lichborn and Blood Tap for maximum persistent survivability. The 6th tier is purely situational. Go for Gorfiend's Grasp when grouping up ads or trash is useful to increase in raids DPS, or it's just helpful in general. And then go for Remorseless Winter when AoE stunning a group of ads or trash is useful for locking them down for whatever reason. And go for Desecrated Ground when you know escaping CC will be beneficial, especially if that CC is potentially life-threatening. The last tier is purely based upon which playstyle you want to take, and we'll cover it in the damage section. But if you want my opinion, I think the Necrotic Plague, Necroblight playstyle is the most reliable and fun way to play the spec. Now let's quickly run through the glyphs. For major glyphs, I'd firstly recommend Glyph of Blood Boil to very simply increase your AoE damage. Secondly, Glyph of Raised Ally will make combat resing much simpler without nerfing your DPS. Thirdly, go for Glyph of Regenerative Magic, since this will increase the runic power you gain overall from a fight. For minor glyphs, firstly go for the Glyph of Path of Frost, since this will reduce your falling damage, which will inevitably happen at some point in a raid. And also go for Glyph of Tranquil Grip and Army of the Dead, so that you don't irritate the tank, and also because Death Grip is actually a very useful piece of utility, and you want to be taking advantage of its usefulness without actually killing yourself. Now let's jump into damage. Before we go into spells and abilities, I feel it's important to understand precisely how the runic and runic power system works. So you have 3 types of runes, Blood, Frost and Unholy, with 2 sets for each type. The first rune you consume of the one type will replenish instantly, but the second rune will only begin replenishing when the first rune has become usable. So for instance, I use 2 blood boils in a row. The second blood rune won't begin replenishing until the first blood rune is usable again. This is precisely why we try to avoid using 2 abilities in a row, since we want our runes to begin replenishing early, which is why we split our rune consumption. An example would be if I use 2 Festering Strikes in a row, then the global cooldown duration will be added to the rune recharge time, but if I used a Festering Strike, then a Scare Strike, 1 Blood, 1 Frost and 1 Unholy rune will begin replenishing early. It's hard to explain, but all you need to understand is that if you use 2 rune types in a row, you waste about a second of your time, so you should be using different rune types in a row instead. For the only exception would be, however, Death runes, which are created from consuming your runes with either Festering Strike, Blood Boil and Icy Touch. Death runes can be consumed with any ability despite its rune type, so you can spam about 6 Scare Strikes or Blood Boils in a row. But more on that later. And also remember that each rune you consume generates 10 runic power, so if with a Festering Strike you are consuming 2 runes, that will generate 20 runic power. Another system to learn about Death Knight's pressure before we jump into the actual rotation is the Necro Blight system. This system is obtained by choosing the Unholy Blight and Necrotic Plague talents. The idea is to use Unholy Blight when a fight starts to build Necrotic Plague stacks, and then retain the dot with Festering Strike until the Holy Blight comes off cooldown, which is about 1.5 minutes. You need to spam Festering Strike. You won't need to spam Festering Strike, but you will need to use it occasionally with your Death runes. The great thing about this playstyle is that you can continue to do loads of damage without actually being in melee range. Now let's go into the rotation. I don't like to call it a rotation, I prefer to call it a priority order system, since that makes much more sense. Anyway, let's jump into this. So, this is like a chronological order of the priorities for Death Knight. So, the first thing I say is going to be the first priority, that kind of thing. When the boss goes below 45% health, consume either an Unholy rune or Death rune with Soul Reaper. Use Gargoyle and Dark Transformation whenever they are available. Pop Army of the Dead 7 seconds before the boss pulls. Consume your potion just before the boss is pulled, and again later in the fight. Consume your Death and Unholy runes with Scare Strike. Consume your Frost and Blood runes with Festering Strike, but always remember to split up your runes. Use Death Coil the precise moment 3 of your runes begin replenishing, so 1 of each rune type. This is for when you are using Runic Corruption, which cuts your rune recharge time in half. There's no point in this effect occurring when your runes are about, a second from recharging. It is most optimal to get the proc as soon as the runes begin recharging. Use Empower Rune Weapon during strong strength procs from either your weapon enchant or trinket. It's probably best to use this in the opener to maximize your burst, even though you don't really need it, but it will save a little time on your runes and build up Shadow Infusion stacks quickly, which we'll talk about in the pet section right now. The pet isn't massively complicated to understand, but it's important to understand how to maximize his damage. With each Death Coil, your pet gains a Shadow Infusion stack, which will increase the pet's damage done. When it stacks to 5, the pet will transform and do even more damage. There is a simple method to keep your pet in Dark Transformation most of the time, and it's very simple to learn. Simply, whenever your Dark Transformation is about to fall off, I'd recommend the add-on Tell Me When, by the way, to track its actual duration. Ensure you either have a big pool of runic power or some death runes, any runes to consume. This is so that when the buff drops off, you can quickly build up the stacks again so that your pet goes into Dark Transformation faster. If you get a sudden doom proc during this, it pretty much happens instantly, so remember to stop using your Death Coils and your runes when Dark Transformation is at about 7 seconds left. Now let's quickly run through the priority sequence for your AoE rotation. Okay, keep Death and Decay on the ground constantly. Put diseases on your target. Convert all your Frost and Blood runes into Death runes, Unholy runes also if you have Blood Tap. Spam Blood Boil to spread diseases and damage. Fill in with Scare Strikes and Soul Reaper to build up runic power and to also obviously do some damage. Dump runic power with Death Coil, and always remember the rune control system that I taught you earlier. So those of you who like to play with Defile and what was it called, Breath of Sigil, so I'm just going to quickly talk about them right now. So Defile, it's very simple, just keep it on the ground all the time whenever the cooldown is up, okay? Simple as that. For Breath of Sidrigosa, you want to make sure you can retain Breath of Sidrigosa as long as possible. So make sure you, when you begin to use it, you have a lot of runes to use. Make sure you have a lot of runic power, preferably all your runic power, and save Empower Rune Weapon for when you're actually using it. So use Empower Rune Weapon, when you consume your runes, and there is a rotation for it. Just basically, the ideology, the philosophy is to just keep Breath of Sidrigosa up for as long as humanly possible, and it's also recommended that you can use kind of AMS if you're taking a lot of magical damage. At some point, use AMS just before you pop BOS, so you can generate runic power, loads of runic power. So basically, just make sure you generate loads of runic power to keep it up for as long as possible. It's really simple as that. Now let's run through the utility at a Death Knight's disposal. Firstly, let's go through the defensive cooldowns. Anti-magic shell. This should be used when you can anticipate big magical damage, to prevent damage, obviously, but to also generate runic power from the damage you absorb. Use Icebound Fortitude in the same way, but perhaps during a longer period of big damage intake, since the duration is actually pretty long, and it can also pop you out of stuns. Remember, don't neglect a Death Strike just because it's a DPS loss. If you need it to survive, then you use it, since you're no use to anyone dead. Use Mind Freeze to interrupt boss and trash spellcasts. Use Chains of Ice to pin down ants or trash. The duration can also be extended with Festering Strike. Switch into Blood Presence the same way you use Anti-Magic Shell. It can also be helpful during solo situations, but be careful not to rub aggro from a tank. Anyway lads, that is the end of the guide. If you're about to write a nasty comment about, where the hell is the game footage, I want to see some game footage, it's all fine and dandy talking about that, but give us some proof, then I will probably be I'm gonna release a gameplay talk through guide soon. I'm basically just gonna jump myself into a raid and talk through shit, probably do shit DPS because I'm like talking through it, but at the end of the day I'll probably be helpful to you guys. Anyway, my name is the Meta Goblin, and until my next video, ciao!